Every fall, you rake up leaves, bag them, and drag them to the curb. Every week, you scrape dinner scraps into the trash. Every spring, you drive to the garden center and buy bags of compost, bags of fertilizer, and you haul them home and spread them across beds that still somehow underperform. And at no point do you stop and realize that you are throwing away the same materials on Monday that you are paying to buy back on Saturday. Now here is the contrast that should make you uncomfortable. An Amish farm produces zero garden waste, none. Every leaf, every kitchen scrap, every forkful of barn cleanings goes into one place, the compost pile. And what comes out of that pile 3 to 4 months later is a dark, crumbly, sweet-smelling material that the Amish consider more valuable than anything you could buy in a store. They call it the foundation of everything. They have never purchased a bag of compost or a bag of fertilizer, and their soil is richer than anything in your neighborhood. My name is Dennis Harwell. I have been gardening for over 30 years, and I am embarrassed to admit that for the first 15 of those years, I did not compost at all. I thought it was complicated, messy, and slow. I had a vague mental image of a smelly heap attracting rats, and I wanted no part of it. Then I visited an Amish farm outside of Intercourse, Pennsylvania, and watched the farmer's wife walk me through their composting system. It was not complicated, it was not smelly, and it was not slow. It was the simplest, most logical thing I had ever seen in a garden. She built layered piles from materials that were already on the property, turned them on a regular schedule, and produced finished compost in about 3 months during warm weather. The compost was beautiful. It looked and smelled like rich forest floor. And she told me, with complete sincerity, that this pile was the most important thing on the entire farm. Not the barn, not the livestock, the compost pile. Because without it, nothing else produces. That conversation changed my gardening permanently. Let me walk you through exactly how the Amish do it, step by step, so you can start building the same foundation under your own garden. The Amish live by a principle called Gelassenheit, which means yielding to the natural order. In their gardens and on their farms, this principle shows up as a fierce commitment to the closed loop. Nothing is wasted because waste does not exist in nature. A fallen leaf is not garbage. It is next year's soil. A bucket of kitchen scraps is not trash. It is nitrogen waiting to be returned to the ground. Barn cleanings are not a chore to be disposed of. They are the richest fertility source on the property. Modern life taught us to see these materials as problems to be removed. The Amish see them as resources to be composted. And that single shift in perspective is the difference between soil that needs constant purchased inputs and soil that feeds itself year after year. Every Amish garden I have visited has the compost pile in a place of prominence, usually close to both the kitchen and the garden because it is used constantly. It is not an afterthought tucked in a forgotten corner. It is the engine that drives everything else. Here is how to build one that works the way theirs do. Location matters more than most composting guides admit. The Amish place their compost piles on bare earth, never on concrete or pavement, because direct soil contact allows earthworms and beneficial microorganisms to migrate up into the pile from below. Those organisms are your workforce. They do the actual decomposition. Without them, you are relying entirely on heat and time, which is slower and less effective. Choose a spot that gets partial shade. Full sun in summer dries out your pile too quickly. Full shade keeps it too cool. A spot with morning sun and afternoon shade is ideal. Place it within easy walking distance of your kitchen because if it is inconvenient, you will stop adding kitchen scraps within 2 weeks. I know this because that is exactly what happened the first time I put my pile at the far back corner of my property. Now, size. This is where most home composters fail before they start. A pile that is too small will not generate enough internal heat to decompose properly or kill weed seeds. The minimum effective size is 3 feet wide by 3 feet deep by 3 feet tall. Anything smaller, and you are making a cold pile that will take a year or more to break down. The Amish typically maintain piles that are 4 to 5 feet wide and about 4 feet tall, which gives them more thermal mass and faster decomposition. You do not need a bin or a tumbler. The Amish use open piles with no structure at all, or at most a 3-sided enclosure made from wooden pallets. Do not let the composting product industry convince you that you need expensive equipment. You need a patch of ground, raw materials, and a garden. Fork. This is the core technique. And it is where the Amish approach differs from the way most people casually toss things into a pile and hope for the best. Composting is not random. It is a recipe. And like any recipe, the ratio of ingredients determines the result. You need two categories of materials, browns and greens. Browns are carbon-rich, dried leaves, straw, shredded cardboard, wood shavings, and newspaper. Greens are nitrogen-rich. Kitchen scraps like vegetable peelings, fruit cores, coffee grounds, and eggshells, fresh grass clippings, garden trimmings that are still green, and manure, which we will talk about in the next step. The ideal ratio is roughly 3 parts brown to 1 part green by volume. This means for every bucket of kitchen scraps you should add roughly 3 buckets of dried leaves, straw, or shredded cardboard. The Amish build their piles in distinct layers, and this is important for even decomposition. Start with a base layer of coarse brown, material about 6 to 8 inches deep. Straw and small sticks work well for this because they create air channels at the bottom of the pile that promote drainage and airflow. Next, add a layer of green material about 2 to 3 inches deep. Then another layer of browns, 6 inches deep. Then greens. Continue alternating until the pile reaches at least 3 feet tall. Water each layer as you build. The moisture level should feel like a wrung-out sponge. If you grab a handful and squeeze, you should get a drop or two of water, but not a stream. Too dry and the microorganisms cannot work. Too wet and you create anaerobic conditions that produce that foul, sour smell people associate with bad compost. If your pile ever smells bad, it is too wet or has too much green material. Add browns and turn it, and the smell will correct within a day or two. The Amish woman who taught me this method told me she thinks of it like making a layer cake. Browns are the cake layers, greens are the filling, and moisture is what holds it all together. That image stuck with me, and it makes the ratio intuitive in a way that reading numbers on a page never did. Here is where the Amish have a significant advantage over most home gardeners. And I want to be honest about that. They have horses, cows, and chickens. That means they have a constant supply of animal manure, which is the single most effective composting accelerator that exists. Manure is extremely high in nitrogen and loaded with the very microorganisms that drive decomposition. When you add manure to a compost pile, you are essentially pouring starter culture into the system. The pile heats up faster, breaks down faster, and produces richer finished compost. If you have access to animal manure from a local farm, horse stable, or neighbor with chickens, add it as one of your green layers. A 2 to 3 inch layer of manure every 12 to 18 inches as the pile goes up. Chicken manure is the hottest, meaning highest in nitrogen, so use thinner layers of about 1 inch. Horse and cow manure are milder and can go a bit thicker. Now, if you do not have access to manure, and most suburban gardeners do not, you can still make excellent compost. Fresh grass clippings are the next best nitrogen source. Coffee grounds, which you can often get in large quantities for free from local coffee shops, are another strong nitrogen source. Even a thin layer of alfalfa meal, which costs a few dollars for a bag that lasts an entire season, will accelerate decomposition significantly. The pile will simply take a few weeks longer without manure than it would with it, 3 to 4 months instead of 2 to 3. That is a manageable difference. Do not let the lack of manure stop you from composting entirely. The Amish use manure because they have it. The principle works with whatever nitrogen sources you have available. This is the step that separates compost that is ready in 3 months from compost that sits in a sad lump for 2 years and never really finishes. A compost pile is a living system, and it needs 3 things to work efficiently: oxygen, moisture, and heat. Your job is to manage all 3. Turning is how you provide oxygen. Without oxygen, the aerobic bacteria that drive fast decomposition die off and are replaced by anaerobic bacteria that work slowly and produce foul odors. The Amish turn their piles every 2 to 3 weeks using a garden fork. You are not just stirring the top. You are moving the outer, cooler material into the center where the heat is and moving the inner material to the outside. A full turn takes about 15 to 20 minutes for a standard pile. That is roughly 1 hour per month of total labor. Moisture needs to be checked every time you turn. If the interior is dry and dusty, add water as you turn. If it is slimy or waterlogged, add dry brown material and mix it through. The wrung-out sponge test applies throughout the entire life of the pile, not just when you build it. Temperature is your indicator that the pile is working. A properly built pile will reach internal temperatures of 130 to 150 degrees Fahrenheit within the first 5 to 7 days. You can check this with a compost thermometer, which costs about $10 to $15, or you can do what the Amish do. Stick your hand into the pile about 12 inches deep. If it is hot enough that you cannot comfortably keep your hand there, it is working. That heat is generated by microbial activity, and it is what kills weed seeds, breaks down tough materials, and produces finished compost quickly. If your pile never gets hot, it is either too small, too dry, or does not have enough nitrogen-rich green material. Add greens, add water, and rebuild it to the minimum 3-foot dimension. One thing the Amish taught me that I have never read in a composting book is this: do not baby the pile. It does not need to be perfect. If you miss a turning by a week, it is fine. If the ratio is not exactly 3 to 1, it will still work. The pile is a forgiving system. Roughly right is good enough. What matters is that you keep adding material, keep it moist, and turn it regularly. Perfection is not required. Consistency is. Unfinished compost applied to your garden can actually harm plants by tying up nitrogen in the soil as it continues to decompose, and by introducing organic acids that can burn roots. So, knowing when your compost is truly done matters. Finished compost has 4 characteristics, and all 4 must be present. First, it is dark brown to black in color, uniform throughout, with no recognizable pieces of the original materials. You should not be able to identify a banana peel, a leaf, or a piece of straw. Everything has broken down into a consistent, crumbly material. Second, it smells like rich earth, like the floor of a healthy forest after a rain. If it smells sour, ammonia-like, or rotten, it is not done. Third, it is cool to the touch. The microbial activity that generated all that heat has finished, and the pile has returned to ambient temperature. If it is still warm in the center, give it more time. Fourth, it crumbles easily in your hand. It should have a texture similar to damp coffee grounds, not clumpy, not powdery, not sticky. The Amish test their compost with a simple method I now use myself. Take a handful of the finished material and put it in a sealed jar for 3 days. Open the jar and smell it. If it smells sweet and earthy, it is ready. If it smells sour or off, it needs more time. This jar test catches compost that looks finished on the surface but still has active decomposition happening inside. It takes 10 seconds to set up and saves you from applying unfinished compost to your beds. The Amish do not just scatter compost on top of the soil and call it done. They have a specific application method that maximizes its benefit, and it is different depending on the time of year. In early spring, 3 to 4 weeks before planting, apply 3 to 4 inches of finished compost across the entire surface of your garden beds. Work it into the top 8 to 10 inches of soil with a garden fork. Do not just leave it on top. The nutrients and biology in compost need to be integrated into the root zone where your plants can access them. Leaving it as a surface layer means the top few inches get the benefit, but the root zone does not. In midsummer, when your plants are actively growing and you cannot fork the beds without disturbing roots, apply a 1-inch layer of compost around the base of your plants as a top dressing. This is called side dressing, and it works like a slow release feed. Rain and irrigation will carry the soluble nutrients down to the root zone over the following weeks. In fall, after you clear your spent summer crops, apply another 2 to 3 inches and fork it in. Then plant a cover crop over the top. The compost feeds the cover crop protects the soil through winter, and in spring you turn both under and start again. That is the closed loop in action. Here is a detail most composting guides miss. Compost is not just a fertilizer, it is a soil conditioner. In heavy clay, compost opens up the structure and improves drainage. In sandy soil, it increases water retention. After 3 years of consistent application, even the worst native soil becomes workable, productive garden soil. The Amish know this because their grandparents knew it. The science confirms it because soil researchers have measured it. Now, let me give you an honest timeline. If you build your first pile today using the layering method I described with proper moisture and regular turning, you will have finished compost in 3 to 4 months during warm weather. If you start your pile in late fall, decomposition slows dramatically over winter and you are looking at 5 to 6 months. That is normal. The Amish time their largest pile builds for late spring and early summer when temperatures accelerate the process. They build smaller maintenance piles year-round, but the big production piles go up when the weather cooperates. If you are in zones 3 through 5, your composting season is shorter due to cold winters. Build your piles larger, at least 4 feet in each dimension, to retain more heat through the cold months. A larger pile will stay active even when air temperatures drop below freezing because the insulating outer layer protects the hot core. In zones 8 and 9, heat is your friend, but moisture is your challenge. You may need to water your pile weekly during summer to keep it from drying out. A tarp draped loosely over the top can help retain moisture without cutting off airflow. Here's what I want you to take from this. Composting is not a hobby. It is not an optional extra for people who want to feel good about recycling. It is the single most productive thing you can do for your garden, and it costs nothing. The Amish understand this at a level that most modern gardeners have lost sight of. Every scrap of organic material that leaves your property is fertility you will never get back. Close the loop. Build a pile this weekend. Start putting your kitchen scraps, your fallen leaves, your grass clippings, and your garden waste into it instead of into the trash. 3 months from now, you will have the richest soil amendment you have ever used, and you will have paid exactly $0 for it. That is what happens when you stop treating organic matter as waste and start treating it as the foundation of a productive garden. Tell me in the comments what you are currently throwing away that could be going into a compost pile. I read every single one, and if you know a gardener who is still buying bags of compost every spring, send them this video. Their wallet and their garden will both thank you. I will see you in the next one.